Ever notice how some moments in history just completely change things? Like everything shifts in an instant.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Turning points.
Yeah. And today we're looking at one of those huge moments, the 1857 Dred Scott Supreme Court decision.
Big one.
Really big. And, you sent me some fascinating stuff on this. And what really stood out to me was just the need to understand this case at its core. Why does it still matter so much today?
Well, at the center of it all, you have Dred Scott, who was enslaved in Missouri, right?
Right.
And he's arguing for his freedom based on the time he spent living in the Wisconsin Territory. And as you know, slavery was outlawed there because of the Missouri Compromise. So basically, our goal today is to really break down the big questions the Supreme Court was facing, and also, honestly, just how shocking their decision ended up being.
Yeah, let's talk about Dred Scott the person for a second. Because he was living in a place where slavery was legal, Missouri, but then he ends up living in a territory, Wisconsin, where it was outlawed. So his argument, at least from what I'm gathering from everything you sent over, was that that time spent in free territory should have legally made him a free man, even when he went back to Missouri. I mean, it seems pretty logical when you put it like that.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Kind of a common sense argument. But the thing is, the laws around slavery back then were so complicated, so full of contradictions. Scott's case really hinged on the idea that the laws of that free territory, Wisconsin, should overrule the laws of the slave state, Missouri, once he had actually lived there. His belief was that once you gain freedom, it can't just be taken away because you move somewhere else.
Okay, that makes sense. So when this case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, there are two big questions they have to deal with right away, and that's based on all the research we've both done here. What were those initial sticking points?
Well, the first question, and this is a really fundamental one, was whether Dred Scott, as an enslaved person, a person of African descent, even had the right to file a lawsuit in federal court. Could he even be considered a citizen under the law?
Right, like did he even have the right to be in that courtroom in the first place?
Exactly. That's the core issue. And then, of course, the second question flows directly from his claim. So, did his time in Wisconsin actually legally make him free? Did it matter?
Now, it's pretty clear from the material that Chief Justice Roger Taney, the guy in charge of the court, he had much bigger goals for this case. He wanted to use this case to solve the whole national fight over slavery. Talk about pressure to try to settle this massive issue with one single legal decision.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to put on one court case, right?
Right.
And there's another layer to this whole thing. It's actually pretty interesting. Taney himself, earlier in his career, he was actually against slavery. I mean, he said it publicly. He even freed the enslaved people that he inherited. But by the time the Dred Scott case comes around, he was convinced that the Supreme Court had to step in and make a final decision to, maybe finally bring some peace to all this fighting over slavery.
So he really flipped his viewpoint.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Wow. Okay, so to get to this big solution, this final decision, Taney pushed the court to think about even bigger constitutional questions, ones that went way beyond just Dred Scott himself. So what were those big questions that really made this case even more important?
Well, he wanted the court to grapple with two huge constitutional questions. Number one, did the U.S. Congress even have the power to make laws about slavery in the territories? And number two, if they did have that power, was the Missouri Compromise,
Yeah.
which of course banned slavery in Wisconsin, was that even constitutional? Was it legal? These were the really controversial questions, the ones that had everyone on edge.
Okay, so we have Dred Scott's own fight for freedom, right? We have these initial questions about whether he could even sue and whether living in a free territory mattered. And then we have Chief Justice Taney wanting to basically end the debate on slavery forever. And that brings us to the first big bombshell of the case, the court's decision on citizenship. What happened there?
Well, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 vote, said that Dred Scott couldn't sue in federal court because he wasn't a citizen. And even more than that, they said he could never be a citizen of the United States. And the crazy thing is, Taney, in his written opinion, he went even further. He said no person of African descent, slave or free, could ever be a citizen under the Constitution.
Wow, that's a lot. It's like they were saying an entire group of people didn't belong no matter what. It's not just about one guy's lawsuit anymore. It's about who gets to be American.
Right, that's exactly it. This decision basically said that African Americans had no place in the American government. It was a powerful statement about who they thought was part of we the people, and it took away basic legal rights, any chance of being treated equally under the law.
And as if that wasn't enough, the second bombshell of this decision targeted the Missouri Compromise directly. And that, of course, was the whole basis of Dred Scott's argument for freedom. So what did the court decide about that law?
They rejected his argument, his claim that living in Wisconsin made him free, and Taney's reasoning. It all came down to the idea that slaves were property under the law. So, according to him, all the protections for property owners in the Fifth Amendment, those applied to slave owners too.
Hold on. The Fifth Amendment, that's the one we usually think of with, like, pleading the Fifth. Right. Legal rights, fair trials. How did that become part of the argument against the Missouri Compromise?
That's what's wild about this whole thing. Tony basically said that if you outlaw slavery in a territory, you're taking away a slaveholder's property, their slaves, without due process. And the Fifth Amendment, he argued, says the government can't just take your stuff without paying you or going through the proper legal process. So in his view, the Missouri Compromise, by banning slavery, was unconstitutional. It violated property rights. It's a scary example of how even good legal ideas can be twisted to support something truly wrong.
So basically, he's saying Congress couldn't ban slavery in the territories and actually had to protect the rights of slaveholders to bring enslaved people into those places. It completely goes against what everyone thought the Missouri Compromise meant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tony was saying the Missouri Compromise had been wrong from the very beginning, that Congress never had the power to limit slavery in the territories. And that was a huge win for states' rights, especially in the South. It was a big setback for the abolition movement.
I can't even imagine the reaction to this decision. It must have been huge. And all the sources you sent definitely highlight that there was a very different response depending on where you were in the country.
Oh yeah, it was a powder keg. In the South, the slaveholders, they celebrated this decision as a total victory.
Sure. It's what they wanted.
Right. They finally had legal backing for their right to own slaves and to spread slavery without the federal government getting in their way. As far as they were concerned, the fight over slavery in the territories, it was finally over, and they won.
But in the North.
It was the exact opposite. Utter outrage. Shock. I mean, think about it. For a huge part of the population, telling them that black people could never be citizens and that slavery could spread pretty much anywhere, it was morally unthinkable.
And our sources, they really capture that, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. You can really see it in the newspapers at the time. For example, the New York Tribune, they called the decision a wicked and false judgment. And the New York Independent, they ran a headline that said, and I quote, "The decision of the Supreme Court is the moral assassination of a race and cannot be obeyed." And, those are powerful words. You can feel the anger, the sense of injustice in that.
Moral assassination of a race.
Yeah, that about sums it up. It really gets at how unfair, how wrong this decision was for so many people. So just to recap, the two big decisions that came out of this case were that African Americans couldn't be citizens and that Congress had no right to ban slavery in the territories, which basically destroyed the Missouri Compromise.
Got it. And here's the crazy part. Taney thought this would end the debate on slavery, that it would bring the country together. But in reality, it did the complete opposite. It just made the tensions between the North and South even worse, practically pushed us right into the Civil War. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? Like how one court case, one decision could change the course of history like that. It really makes you think about the power that judges have and the responsibility that comes with that power, right? Like what happens when their decisions are just wrong?
It reminds us that these legal decisions, they're not just words on paper. They're tied to the real world. They affect real people. The Dred Scott case, it's a perfect example of how legal interpretations can have huge, sometimes unexpected consequences. They can divide us even more, and they can change the direction of an entire nation. It forces us to constantly ask ourselves, are our laws truly just? Are they based on equality? And can legal arguments be used to both uphold and destroy those ideals? And that's something we all need to keep thinking about. It's not just history. These questions, they're still relevant today.
They really are. Lots to think about.
Definitely.
Well, until next time.
Thanks for having me. This is a good one.
I know, right? All right, see ya.
See ya.